All right, so today we're diving into something pretty fascinating. A YouTube video someone sent us, Your Mind is God's Mind, by this guy, David Parrish.
Mm.
It's all about like spirituality, personal growth and stuff. I'm really curious to kind of unpack it all, see if we can glean any like practical takeaways, for like everyday life and all that.
Yeah, for sure. It's interesting, right off the bat, he jumps into this concept of God within. He's like, don't look for God somewhere out there. He's
Yeah.
saying God's nowhere else but where you are, like right here, right now.
I kind of like that, this God within idea. It's like we each have that, Buddha nature, Christ consciousness, the Tao or whatever resonates, already within us.
Hmm. And he even connects it to, this concept of omnipresence,
Oh, yeah.
that God is everywhere, which you see in a lot of spiritual traditions. But he's really saying God is right here inside of you.
I like that. That's a good way to put it.
Yeah.
Now, what about this personality thing he talks about?
Oh, yeah. He calls it like a displaced aspect of God focused on survival in like the physical world.
Hmm. It makes me think of like our primal instincts, right? Like fight or flight and all that.
Exactly. Yeah. Think of it this way. Your personality is like the programming that keeps you safe. It's that part of you that's always looking for threats, trying to figure out how to survive. And I mean, that was obviously essential back in the day when, our ancestors were dealing with real dangers like all the time. But now it creates a lot of stress and negativity, I think, in our modern world.
Yeah. It's like our brains are still stuck in that run from the saber-toothed tiger mode, even though most of us are, facing way less dramatic stuff these days.
Totally. And this is where his example about the rain, the traffic, the crowds, it just clicked for me. Those are things that, like, I think so many of us just automatically react negatively to, right? But he chooses to approach them with playfulness, fun even.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, it's a total shift in perspective.
Yeah, it is. And I think it ties into what he calls that, what was it? The conversation of what's wrong, right? Like we just complain about the weather, traffic, work.
Oh.
It's like this endless loop of negativity our personalities latch onto.
We all do it. But the point is, awareness is key. Paris talks about this ongoing practice of, paying attention and noticing when your personality's kind of running the show, especially when it leads to all that negativity.
Like noticing when we're caught up in those thought patterns.
Exactly.
That reminds me of that story he tells about the Zen teacher and the cancer diagnosis.
Yeah.
The student's freaking out and the teacher's just like, how long have you been practicing this? How long have you been walking the path?
Powerful, right?
And it really highlights that even in the toughest situations, awareness can make all the difference. It's not ignoring the problems, but choosing how we react to them.
It's like moving from reaction to response. Not just being driven by fear and that survival programming, but acting from a place of deeper understanding.
I like that. So we're talking about like transcending the personality, connecting with our true nature. But he says that true nature is basically like being God, which I got to say, that's a pretty bold statement. It almost sounds like egotistical,
Yeah, it definitely pushes back against those traditional ideas of God as this like separate external being. He even says at one point, if you want to know God, be God because you are.
Whoa.
Yeah, I know. But I think what he's getting at is we already have all those qualities we associate with God. The love, the compassion, wisdom, peace. It's about recognizing that stuff is within us, not out there somewhere.
So it's not about trying to like be good in that traditional sense, but more about tapping into something much deeper, something that's already there.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it.
Okay. So it's not about suddenly having like superpowers or anything. It's about embracing that inherent wisdom, love, and peace that's already inside.
Exactly. And using that as your foundation, even when you're facing those challenges.
This being God idea, it connects directly to the power of silence that he talks about, right? Like so many spiritual teachers emphasize that, creating space for that deeper connection.
Yeah, he talks about the importance of stillness, quieting the mind so you can connect with your true self. And he mentions another teacher, David Wren, who talks about that incredible fulfillment you find in those moments.
It sounds powerful.
Yeah.
But how do we actually do that? How do we like create that stillness? Tap into this God within. It's one thing to say be God, but how do we actually live that out in our daily lives?
Well, it's a practice. It's not about reaching some perfect state, but more about, cultivating that awareness moment to moment.
So it's about like noticing when that survival programming kicks in and then choosing a different response.
Exactly.
So like if someone cuts me off in traffic and I feel that anger, That's my survival programming.
Totally. It's your body getting ready for that fight or flight, even though it's not really necessary.
Ooh,
Right.
yeah.
But when you recognize it's just your programming, you can choose a calmer way to respond.
Hmm. Like, take a breath. Remind myself I'm safe. And let the anger go.
Yes, it's like learning to observe your thoughts and emotions without getting completely swept away by them.
Makes sense. Parrish talks about transcendental wisdom, going beyond just being a good person. What do you think he means by that? It's a little counterintuitive, isn't it?
Yeah, he's suggesting that, true spiritual growth goes beyond just following the rules or being a better version of, well, your personality. It's more about accessing a deeper wellspring of wisdom and love, something that transcends our limited human understanding. It's recognizing that you're already inherently good, inherently divine,
Right.
and then letting that guide your actions, your interactions.
So it's a shift from like self-improvement to self-acceptance and self-realization.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to frame it.
It's powerful stuff. But a part of me is like, is this really possible? Can we actually live from this place of like peace and joy all the time?
Well, Parrish acknowledges that it's a practice, a journey, not a destination. There are times when we all fall back into those old patterns, when the personality takes over.
Yeah, definitely.
But that's okay. The key is to keep coming back to that awareness, to remembering your true nature, and to approach it all with, a sense of playfulness and curiosity.
I like that. Playfulness takes the pressure off a bit.
Totally. Life's supposed to be enjoyed, not just endured. And when you connect with that joy and playfulness that comes from being aligned with your true nature,
Yeah.
it makes the whole journey a lot more fun.
All right, so we've covered this God within idea, the challenges of our personality, the importance of awareness, stillness. What else did Parrish talk about that we should dive into?
Well, he talks about this idea of predetermination,
Oh, yeah, that's a big one.
which can be a little mind-bending, I know.
Yeah, for sure. This is where I might need some help unpacking things.
Well, it's complex, but I think we can break it down. Essentially, he seems to be saying that if we are God, or at least have those qualities of God within us, then on some level, we're also the creators of our own reality.
That is mind-bending. What about free will? Does this mean we have no control over our lives?
That's where it gets tricky. I mean, if everything's predetermined, like Parrish suggests, then on some level, we've already chosen it all, right?
Hmm.
But what he's getting at, I think, is that even if everything's set, we still have a choice in how we experience it. We can choose to go through life with fear, resistance, negativity, or we can choose love, acceptance, joy.
So it's not about controlling what happens, but controlling how we react to it.
Yes, it's about shifting from powerlessness to empowerment. Instead of seeing ourselves as victims, we can see that we're actually active participants in creating our own experience.
I like that. Parrish talks about looking at challenging situations like that, like getting a tough diagnosis.
Yeah.
He says we can see it through this lens of predetermination.
It's about embracing what is rather than resisting it.
Not worrying about the future, not dwelling on the past, but just being present.
And finding ways to enjoy yourself, even in the midst of difficulty. He even talks about how he got a pretty serious diagnosis himself, and his response was just, oh, that's interesting.
Wow, that's incredible. It takes a lot of, awareness and acceptance, right?
Yeah, he's not downplaying the seriousness, but he's also not letting it define his whole experience. He's staying present, open.
Powerful stuff. I think that's a good message for anyone going through tough times.
It is. It reminds us that we always have a choice in how we respond. Fear and resistance, or love and acceptance.
This predetermination idea is definitely something I'll be thinking about more. But for now, I want to talk about another thing Parrish mentions. Starting each day with a few moments of stillness.
Oh, yeah, that's a great one.
It's such a practical technique for, creating more awareness, starting a day from a grounded place.
He talks about sitting on the side of the bed each morning and just observing your mind as it starts running its programs. It's like hitting pause before the chaos of the day really begins.
I love that visual. It's like creating a buffer between you and your thoughts before they take over.
You're moving from unconsciousness to consciousness, reactivity to responsibility.
Parrish also talks about our thoughts not always being in our best interest. What did he mean by that?
Well, he says our minds are often programmed for survival, which, like we talked about, can lead to a lot of negative thinking.
Yeah?
Our thoughts get filled with fear, worry, doubt, self-criticism. They might have served us in the past, but they don't always reflect our true nature, our potential.
So how do we break free from all that negative thinking? Sometimes it feels like those thoughts just are who we are.
It starts with awareness. Becoming aware of your thoughts and choosing not to identify with them. That's how you start shifting your relationship to them.
He uses the analogy of the mind as a computer program, right? He says you can actually hear the mind talk. You're not hearing the self-talk. The self is much quieter than the mind.
Yeah. Powerful analogy.
It helps us understand we have a choice in how we relate to our thoughts,
Yeah.
Do we let them run our lives?
Mm.
Or do we step back, observe them with a little detachment?
And from that detachment, you can start making choices that are more aligned, with your true nature, your values, your desires.
It's about moving from reaction to response,
Fear to love.
limitation to possibility. It's about
Yeah.
stepping into our power as conscious creators.
Absolutely.
That's a pretty radical shift.
It is. But it can lead to some incredible peace, joy, and fulfillment.
One last thing from Parrish I want to talk about. This idea of being God. He's saying it's not about worshiping a deity out there somewhere, but recognizing the divine within ourselves.
Right.
He even says, if you want to know God, be God because you are. I'm still trying to wrap my head around that.
It's definitely a bold statement. He's challenging the traditional idea of God, as the separate being. He's suggesting that the divine, those qualities of God, aren't something we need to seek outside of ourselves, but something we already are.
So it's about tapping into that love, wisdom, and power within each of us.
Exactly. And when we do that, we start seeing the world differently. You see the interconnectedness, the beauty, the sacredness in everything, and we start living from a place of greater love, compassion, understanding.
That's beautiful. I think we've covered a lot in this first part of our dive into David Parrish's teachings.
We have.
This idea of God within, the challenges of our personality, the importance of awareness, stillness, and this whole mind-bending idea of predetermination. I need a minute to process it all.
Yeah, it's a lot to take in.
It is. In the next part of our deep dive, we're going to explore some of the more practical techniques Parrish suggests, for cultivating awareness, connecting with our true nature, and ultimately living from a place of being God. See you soon.
Sounds good.
So we're back, diving deeper into David Parrish and his Your Mind is God's Mind teachings. We talked about some pretty profound concepts, But now I'm thinking, how do we put all this into practice, like in real life, everyday stuff?
Yeah, he actually offers a lot of practical techniques.
Okay, cool.
And they all kind of revolve around this idea of cultivating awareness. He calls it paying attention. And it's not a one-time thing. It's ongoing.
Right.
It's a practice.
It makes me think about how Parrish contrasts this awareness with, trying to achieve some blissful state. It's like real awareness isn't about forcing yourself to feel a certain way, but more about just noticing what's going on inside, thoughts, feelings, sensations, without judging them.
Yeah, totally. It's about becoming the observer, not the judge. And that detachment, it lets you see your thoughts and emotions more clearly, more objectively.
Which can be pretty freeing, I bet.
Definitely.
And the way he talks about it, it's so vivid. Like he says, the game is on when we start practicing awareness. It makes it feel more engaging,
Great.
like a challenge.
I like that.
It's not a chore.
Yeah, it's not about checking things off a list. It's about engaging with life in a new way.
Right, exactly. He also uses that analogy of our survival programming being like a computer program, right?
Oh, yeah, that's a good one.
He even says, you can actually hear the mind talk. You're not hearing the self talk. The self is much quieter than the mind.
It's true. Our minds can be so loud.
So loud. But it's helpful to think of it that way, right? Because it highlights this idea that we're not our thoughts, we're the ones observing them. And from that place of observation, we can choose which programs to run, so to speak.
Exactly. It's moving from that knee-jerk reaction to a place of conscious choice. And it becomes easier the more you do it.
So if that awareness is the foundation, what are some things we can actually do to, build that awareness muscle?
Well, he talks a lot about stillness and silence,
Right.
which we touched on before. It could be formal meditation, but it could also just be taking a few minutes every day to sit quietly, observe your breath.
He even recommends this really simple morning practice, just sitting on the side of your bed for a couple minutes, just watching your mind as it starts running those programs.
It's like catching those negative thoughts before they really take hold, starting your day from a place of intention instead of just getting swept up in the rush.
Yeah, I like that a lot. What about for someone who's totally new to this, though? They've never really done meditation or anything like that. Where do they start?
It doesn't have to be complicated. Just set a timer for 5 minutes, close your eyes, focus on your breath, notice the rise and fall of your chest, feel the air going in and out of your nose. And when your mind wanders, Just gently bring it back to your breath. No judgment.
It sounds so simple.
It is, but it's powerful.
And the more you do it, you start to notice those moments when your survival programming kicks in, right?
Exactly. When you're reacting from fear, anger, frustration.
So what do we do when those moments, when we notice it happening?
The key is to pause. Create a little space between, whatever's happening and your reaction to it.
Okay.
Take a breath, observe the sensations in your body, and ask yourself, what's the most loving, the wisest response I can offer right now?
It's about retraining our minds, basically, to choose love instead of fear.
Yeah, and that's where the real change happens, It's not about never having those negative emotions, but learning to handle them differently, with more skill, more awareness.
It's funny because this whole being God idea,
Yeah.
it sounded so abstract at first, right? But it starts to make more sense when we look at it through this lens of awareness and choice.
Yeah, totally.
Parrish even says we can use this idea of predetermination when we're facing tough stuff, like getting a difficult diagnosis. He says instead of worrying or fighting against it, we can just accept what is and find ways to enjoy ourselves.
Radical acceptance.
Right. I remember that story he tells about getting a serious diagnosis himself and just saying, oh, that's interesting.
I know, it's amazing, right?
It's like he's not denying the situation, but he's also not letting it totally control him. He's staying open, curious, even playful. It really is.
Yeah.
And it brings us back to that idea of finding joy, playfulness in all parts of life. Parrish says, if it's not fun, it's better left undone. Which is a pretty bold statement.
It is, but it gets you thinking.
Yeah, it makes us question how we're spending our time and energy. Are we doing things out of obligation, or are we finding the joy in them?
Are we aligned with our true selves?
Exactly. And I love how Parrish also emphasizes, being a good social critter. Like, he's acknowledging that we're not just isolated individuals. We have to interact with other people.
Right. People who might not get it, who might not be on the same path.
Exactly. So it's about finding that balance between being authentic, being kind, speaking your truth, but also respecting other people's perspectives.
It's that delicate dance.
It is.
Yeah.
It makes you think about those, like, holiday gatherings, family dinners and stuff. It's so easy to fall back into those old patterns, let those survival programs run wild when you're surrounded by, relatives who know how to push your buttons.
Oh, yeah, I know what you mean.
But what if we went into those gatherings with a different mindset? With awareness, with playfulness?
I like that.
What if we saw it as a chance to practice compassion, understanding, even when it's hard?
It's a shift in perspective, for sure.
It is. It's about seeing every interaction, every situation as a chance to, practice what we're learning. This awareness, love, wisdom.
And remember, it is a practice. We're all going to have those moments where we mess up, where we react instead of responding, where we fall back into those old habits. But that's part of it.
It's all part of the process.
The important thing is to notice it, learn from it, and keep coming back to that awareness, to keep choosing love.
It's like we're constantly learning, growing, peeling back those layers to get to that true self that's always been there all along.
Yeah, I love that image.
And as we do that, we start seeing everything differently. The world looks different. Our relationships look different. We feel different.
It's a whole new way of being.
So as we head into the final part of our deep dive here, what's like the one big takeaway you'd want our listener to walk away with?
I think the most important message is this. We have a choice in how we experience life. We can let our personalities call the shots, let our fears hold us back, or we can connect with that true divine part of ourselves and live from a place of peace, joy, and love.
That's beautiful. It's hopeful. It's empowering.
It is, and it's available to everyone.
Yeah. The power to change, it's already inside us.
Absolutely.
So I hope you've enjoyed this deep dive with us. Think about what resonated with you, what practices you might want to try. And remember that question from David Parrish. What would your life look like if you truly believe that God's nowhere else but where you are? Let that question guide you on your own journey. Thanks for listening.
It's been a pleasure exploring this with you.
Until next time.